All right. How are you guys doing? Excellent. What I would like to do today is go over just a couple things, and I need your help as well. Um, we had that kind of diversity collaborator assignment where we have a discussion, we talk about it, show art that divides and unifies, and we need to come up with a different name for it for future uh, classes. So if you guys could set that in the back of your heads and then give me, I would really appreciate if you could give me like a couple ideas towards the end of class today. Because we, staying away from the word diversity, trying to find out something else that covers the same kind of feeling. The idea of collaborating with people with different voices. Something along those lines. If you guys would help, that would be really nice. Let's see. What I wanted to do today is go over one of the quizzes, go over the wire sculptures, just look at them really briefly. Then look at some of the things that people have done with the structure and skin. And answer any questions you guys might have. And then I also want to talk briefly about the carving assignment I just put online today. And we'll talk about that. I will warn you right now, you guys have chunks of styrofoam to carve, and it is a mess and a half. So I would recommend don't carve anywhere with any kind of carpet, especially carpet that has dark colors to it, because this stuff is a booger. I would recommend carving outside, carving in the garage, or carving somewhere where you have access to good vacuum cleaner, because it will leave little bits of stuff absolutely everywhere and make a gigantic mess, which I don't know. It's a fun project to do, but it is probably one of the messiest. And then right after that, we're going to do an assignment where we put paper mache on it, which just adds to the sticky fun. So, keep that in mind as you go on. But before we get going, do you guys have any pressing questions about stuff that you've encountered so far in the class? All right. Then we will go ahead. Okay, give me just a second here. I am setting things up for our discussion in just a little bit. And I am going to now try to share my screen. I don't know if you guys probably have an easier time, but whenever anybody does intuitively laid out controls on your computer interface, I don't understand how they arrive at the idea that it's intuitive. It's only intuitive to them, apparently. Anyway, here we go. All right, so this is the quiz. And I just wanted to go through some of these things so we can talk about them a little bit. The first one, this quiz is for chapters 5 and 12. And I know it was due on Sunday, but and most people have been able to work on it. But if you're missing anything, I wanted to go over it and talk about it really quickly. Now, this question deals with, and there's Adam has done a little bit of a video talking about it as well, but we're talking about delineated forms in this quiz. Do either of you, oh, now we have, okay, Sylvia, you're here too, great. Do any of you can any of you give like a really quick definition of what a delineated form is, or a quick description?
I might be misremembering, but it's like the forms that are created in like the negative space of different forms. So
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. Cezanne is a Fauvist painter who is famous for being one of the few painters that actually painted outlines for his areas of color. Royden Card is a Utah artist that does landscapes like this, and you can see painted lines and then colors in between the lines. And those are delineated spaces. But when we're talking about delineated forms, what we're talking about is areas that are outlined, like what Sadie's talking about, but that outline can be in a lot of different ways that is not using like a pencil line or a black line. For example, my glasses, the lenses of my glasses are delineated, but they're delineated with these outlines that go around the lenses. Behind me, though, over my shoulder, you have these structures in this painting that are delineated forms, but the delineated forms are described because of a shift in color. This one over here, this delineated form that goes up is delineated with these white lines. But over here, you see these structures here. This form is delineated because it's a very dark color against the light background. For like the folds on my shirt, the forms are delineated because not because anybody's painted outlines, but because there are specific changes in color. There's light colors, there's dark colors. Behind Sadie, you see all the cabinet doors. The delineated forms, you can easily tell where all the doors are, and it's because you see the different structures and shapes. Now, as we look at this, the delineated forms are, we have these curved circles for the ladders, we have these rungs on the ladders, and we have these black lines on the floor. Right here, there isn't an outline of this space, this negative space, like exactly like what Sadie is talking about, but that negative space still exists as a form. And we have these structures that are making shapes that we see without the benefit of having an easy outline. So one aspect of a delineated form would be the wood in the ladder that is defined by the negative space around it. Another is going to be these actual rectangles that are delineated because there is wood around the negative space of the rectangles. Another delineated form is going to be the circle that's within the bounds of these curved ladders. So essentially, a delineated form is any area that is defined by a shift in form. Now, these are more outlined with the black lines, but the rest of this, oh, I'm sorry, somebody is calling me. I have to write a note really quick so I can call them back. And we'll take care of that. So I hope that makes sense. Does anybody not understand that? Or does that make sense? A little bit of a clarification from or a little bit more of a babbling on from what Sadie was saying, just adding to what she was saying. And so this question, in a sentence or two, you can describe some of these forms. You can describe the area, the circle areas defined by the wood, or the rectangle areas defined by the rungs of the ladder. Or you can define the edges of the ladder, or you can describe the edges of the ladder as defined, like Sadie said, by the negative space around it. And so there are several different delineated forms, spaces in this area. And that's something that if you do 2D work, and especially if you do digital painting, it's something that you have to be aware of as you're creating your image, because those delineated spaces are formed sometimes by like the difference between light and shadow, and sometimes by the lines that you draw. And as you got a question too, it says identify the two most common rigid materials used. When you do this, think common materials that have been around for a long time. So eliminate anything that has plastic in it, and I would probably take out glass as well. Fiber arts, I know a lot of people who do, make boats. Most boats today are constructed as fiber art sculptures. They use something called fiberglass, which is a fiber component that is made rigid with the application of a resin. And then here, when we look at this image, this is a Henry Moore sculpture. Can any of you point out to me just a couple of the areas of negative space and explain why the negative space is important to the sculpture? Okay, Camden says negative space is occurring in the gaps between the structure areas, and it helps the sculpture have form rather than just be a giant blob. Yes, exactly. So we have the negative space where we can see the trees behind it. We see this notch in the head area. We see these spaces around the arms. And then even in the sculpture itself, there's layers of depth where we can find negative space. Like in between the top of the torso and this area, we have negative space in here where we can see further back into the sculpture. Yeah, if there was no negative space, we wouldn't have these apparently delineated forms that are created by the white structure being in front of the trees and the grass. So I hope that makes sense to people, because sometimes when we're shifting from 2D to 3D, that is a concept that makes a lot of sense in hindsight, but it's difficult to see when we first approach it. Now in these sculptures, the delineated spaces or the delineated forms are going to be like this tree is a delineated form, and we can see that delineated because of the sky around it. These metal structures become delineated forms, again, for the same reason. We see the water behind it, we see the grass behind it, we see the sky behind it. And, again, here as well, the delineated forms, the same kind of thing. They're created by the background, but they're also created with the difference between the shadow and where the light hits. And I think right here on this pedestal, we can really see delineated forms because the different planes on the pedestal treat the light differently, or the light reacts to it, it bounces off differently, and you can really see that. So that they're forms that are not outlined by a pencil line, but we can really see where they are because the background and lighting and color differences. So if you guys, do any of you feel like we need to go over more of the quiz than that? I'm just gonna scroll down here really quick. Let's see. Oh, one thing I did want to mention is, anybody have an idea why wax is most often cast into another material? First off, what is wax being used most of the time to cast into? Yeah, Sylvia says bronze. Wax is most often cast into metals, and wax is used because you can create something easily out of the wax, pack clay or some other material around it like that, melt all the wax out, and then fill up the void that's left with whatever metal that you've melted down. Some of the oldest examples of this are 3,000 and 4,000 years old, like the Harappans in the Indus Valley in India is some of the oldest bronze casting in the world. the Han in China did some absolutely astounding bronze bells. And I think the real masters closer to home were the Yoruba, the Ife of Yoruba, did 2,000 years ago, did bronze cast sculptures where they could do portraits of people that were almost photoreal, or they were photorealistic. They people did not invest as much energy in photorealism again for maybe 1,500 years until we get to Europe in the Renaissance. So they were in Nigeria, in the continent of Africa. So, and all that stuff, those are examples of, it's called lost wax casting, where since the wax is easy to use and inexpensive, that's what the attention was put into to sculpt it. And it was packed with clay and then heated, melted out, and replaced with metal. Scale is really an important thing. And when you go to this question, if you haven't already taken this, what I'm really happy about is that most people are looking at this and then saying, oh, this scale is important because we expect it to be so much smaller. This, it's a baby. We know how big babies are. And so it feels almost monumental. And here, Dwayne Hansen does a lot of photorealistic life-size human form sculptures, and they feel approachable. I mean, there have been people that have sat down and gotten offended because one of Dwayne Hansen's sculptures didn't answer their questions, didn't respond to them. And then we get somebody who like Slinkachu, who uses tiny N scale figures in settings that are where we see ordinary recognizable objects, and the tiny scale, there's a certain element of humor that opens the doors to further introspection, which I think is really interesting. So scale is a big thing. And then this leads into the assignment of structure and skin. What's most important in this, the skin or the structure? And this particular question, it does not matter which you pick, as long as you're able to describe why you feel that way. So that's something to think about. Before we go on to other stuff, do you guys have any questions about the quiz? Okay, Camden says, I believe it's because it helps the structure with texture and flexibility. Yeah, if you look at the dancing Harappan bronze sculpture of the dancing girl, or dancing female figure, this is about a 3,200 to 4,000-year-old bronze lost wax sculpture. And the person in a little sculpture about this high got the facial features in, and you can see the kind of jewelry that she's wearing and all that kind of stuff because of how flexible wax is and how they were able to apply the texture into it. So yeah, and then carefully pack it with clay. You can record that texture into the clay, melt the wax out, and then you get a lot of texture and detail in the metal, bronze or gold or whatever that you're casting into it. So yeah, all of you are absolutely right. And I want to share some of these wire sculptures with you. We did talk about it a little bit last time, and I'm just going to go through really quick and see what other people have done. One of the things that we talk about with the wire sculpture is it needs to look like a three-dimensional sketch. Another one is it needs to stand by itself. Now, I think this one does a really good job. It obviously can stand by itself, and I think it's a really creative use of the limited wire material that you have. Because you can see there is a three-dimensional form that is outlined. A lot of it is suggested in different things, but this person has taken more of an Alexander Calder kind of approach to the figurative work. I really like these feet and leg structures. I think that turned out really well. And sometimes things go fast. And oh yeah, this is Camden's. This is, again, he's able to do this so that its structure stands by itself. And it looks to me like it's a very well-fed bird. Could be a chicken or a duck. And again, it stands by itself, and we have these scribbles that are defining three-dimensional form. I think that turned out really well. I think we looked at this one last week as well, where you see the antlers. This is a rack. You see the nostrils right here. And this person chose to hang it on a wall. And I kind of like that approach too, because it also is very stable. It's inherently stable, the way that they've done it. This one is hanging. I think this one turned out well too. And again, we can see the kind of scribble form, but we can tell that it is three-dimensionally defined in space, which it's a very important part of the process or the assignment. And the mannequin here, we have definition of lines and forms. And I think that with a little bit of manipulating, this could easily stand on its own. And it would be kind of fun for this person even to maybe give a little bit of a gesture of movement, because they could easily bend the arms and hand type areas, maybe bend the knees a little bit so the figure is moving. And if the figure is moving so that these feet are pointed in slightly different directions, it would be a lot easier to stand this up by itself. Oh, and this was a very happy, relaxed cat that we looked at last week. This looks like another animal that has an awful lot of energy to it. Again, we see that three-dimensional form described by all the scribbles of the wire. And I like that when you guys are doing this with the wire, making it feel like a three-dimensional scribble, like this one. That's a lot of fun to see all that energy being put in. And I think for almost everybody in this class, you guys are really addressing this idea of three-dimensional form. Like I think this is a good example of different kinds of lines. And I'm using lines in kind of air quotes because they're using wire. But we have this kind of form here that is the understructure for the whole head. And then the wire loops around right here. And we have the wire wrapped right here and like crinkly loops right here, and then more spring type loops right here. Then this almost looks like a patchwork type body. So it's kind of fun to see the several different styles of line use. And this is something that Canvas does every once in a while, and I try really hard to remember it. Sometimes it will show, this image is moved at right angles. This is actually the bottom right over here. And Canvas does this. I don't know how you can fix it, so I'm just trying to ignore it. It's only really frustrating when we do the discussions and people include images of their work. That's when it starts getting a little bit frustrating. But do you guys have any questions at all about the wire? I think almost all of you have already turned in the wire. I believe that's right. Okay, Camden, we did talk about this, right? Your comment on the wax. Do you guys see the chat box as well? Okay. Okay, yeah. Camden says he initially thought that structure with the skin was adding skin to the wire sculptures. At the very beginning, that was something that we were toying with, that idea. But one of the reasons why you guys have skewer sticks and popsicle sticks and stuff like that in the kit is that you could make a girding understructure for the structure with skin assignment. And so it is good to hear people's confusion, because I've tried really hard to clarify things. And sometimes, I don't know if you've had it happen to you, but sometimes I will go over it in my head so many times that I think it's completely clear, but I forget that other people outside of my head don't have all that background association. And so when I think it's something clear that I'm saying, somebody without all that same information it's not going to be understandable. So I really appreciate you guys pointing that out to me when it's not very clear. I'm going to go to the structure with skin really quick here. Okay, here we go. And there's a couple things that people have turned in. And this is just the first random turned in object. And what I want you guys to look at, oh, let's see. Sorry, there we go. Hopefully everybody can see that. Some of the things that I really like about this is the person has made a module. Another thing I like about it is that the person has started applying paper to it, and they haven't applied paper in the same way to every aspect of it. And then there's a couple of things that I think the person could probably fiddle with a little bit more, but I want to talk about those two things specifically first. What is the module that this individual made? Can anybody identify that? Yes, Camden says squares or rectangles. Yes, absolutely. And you can see in some of them, like this top vertical one, the one that's vertical on the side, they put paper on there, and they put paper on two horizontal areas. And I think that's a really good start. That's excellent. What I think would be really cool for this is if that person maybe also put paper in some of these triangle spaces as well. Or maybe in one of these areas back here, like this area back here, so that we get a little bit of a reference point behind it. Or maybe on this area on the side. Right now, there's only 4 pieces of paper, and it's a really nice start. But I would suggest for this person to think of a couple other areas they could put paper in. And I'm thinking like this area right here. I hope you can see my mouse. It's the vertical rectangle that is right underneath the very top vertical rectangle. I'm thinking in the front left, we have a couple triangle spaces. One of those would be really cool to have paper in. So yeah, I think a couple more areas of paper would look really interesting for that one. Now I realize that this isn't due yet, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit just to see what people have turned in. I think this is a really fun start as well. One thing that I like about this quite a bit is there is this repeating module form where we have a triangle and then we have these horizontal lines connecting them. Another thing I really like about this is the skin is made with masking tape, and it's very unusual. For this, because this needs to be a 3-dimensional class, I think this would really be successful if the person did maybe made another fan-like form like this and attached it to this at right angles. Because then instead of just being a flat plane that's upright, it would be truly 3-dimensional, which in this class is a 3D design class. So I think that would be really kind of cool, where we have a very similar structure like this. Maybe the planes that we cover with masking tape and these horizontal sticks are replaced or something. So there's 5 of these stick areas, I'm sorry, 4 of the stick areas and 3 of the masking tape areas, something like that, maybe, I don't know. But attaching the 2 of them together so that they're at right angles and meet in the center. I think that would make it quite a bit more successful for a 3D design class. Or not even necessarily doing that, maybe make some more triangle type areas and attaching it on the front and back side in different spaces so that this structure embraces or activates 3D volume a little bit more. I think this is a really good start too. I think this is really fun. I love the fact that it looks to me like the structure is based on triangles. Some of them are tetrahedrons. I think for this to be really successful, I think there needs to be at least 3 or 4 more of these tetrahedron forms with some more paper, and maybe a couple more added on the base and a couple more added to sides sticking out. So it activates 3-dimensional volume even more. I think that would be really good. I think this is an excellent start. I think this is a really fun one too. It looks to me like this is a rhomboidal prism, and that's the form that they're doing. And I think that's kind of fun to have this kind of snake-like thing going up like this. I don't know what it. Let's see. Let me see if I can find another view. I can't trigger the other views, but it would be fun to see this in more of a diagonal shot so we can see it activating space a little bit more. I think that's kind of a fun take on this. Does seeing those and hearing us and talk about them a little bit, does that help a little bit more with this assignment? Okay. Let's see. Sylvia says, that the skin we choose need to be the same material throughout the whole piece, or can it be multiple? That's an excellent question, Sylvia. The answer is it can be whatever you want. I would refrain from using human skin, but there is actually a museum in the United States where there are a couple of people that had books commissioned to be bound with their own skin after they had died. And there is a famous case that actually inspired Alfred Hitchcock to write Psycho. It was an actual case where a person was using human body parts to create things like bowls and lampshades. So I would recommend not using that, but like crochet, tape, strips of paper, weaving, whatever you want to do. There's lots and lots and lots of different options. Yeah, if you don't have access to human skin, don't worry about it. But I would say, Sylvia, use whatever feels consistent with your sculpture that you're making. It does not have to be the same material throughout. So that's a good question. And then Camden asks, oh, actually, I had the same question. I used leftover colored paper that was different on each module. That's great. That is just fine. And Camden also says, luckily, didn't have access to human skin. There was one of the cases I'm thinking of happened in Michigan, where a person who was convicted and sentenced to death by electrocution had his own journal bound in his own skin after he passed away, which I think is kind of gross. So as long as but there's lots of different kinds of stuff that you can do, and I would say just play with the materials that you have access to. I've seen some really interesting ones where people have used very thin lines of hot glue, so it almost looks like spider silk. It turned out really cool, and other people have done. I think one of the grossest things I've seen is somebody chewed up a whole bunch of bubble gum and used the gum, stretched it out after they chewed it, and used that to weave across the different shapes so that was made the skin. And that looks very interesting, but just thinking about it makes me slightly sick. But I'm not here to curb your creativity. Let's see. What other kinds of things have you thought of doing other than colored construction paper? Because one of the things that I was thinking of, you could go to a lot of Dollar Trees and craft stores have origami paper, and some of that can be really interesting. One thing that I've seen is if you make a half and half mixture with like color glue and water, you can attach tissue paper to your structure, paint it with that water and glue structure, and when the glue hardens or dries, the tissue paper looks almost like plastic. You know, it changes the character of the tissue paper. Different things like those might be interesting. Another thing that I've seen people do is kind of crinkle up masking tape. So they do a layer of paper or tape, crinkle up the masking tape a little bit, or even lay down strips of masking tape with the edges torn, and then use a little bit of shoe polish. And it makes for a really interesting look because the shoe polish sticks into the texture that was torn free of the masking tape. So there's some really interesting and fun things that you can do with that. All right. Now I want, if you guys, any more observations or any questions about that? Are we good? Okay, I'm going to go on to the carving thing, and we'll talk about that a little bit. This module is called Biomorphic Abstraction. Anybody have an idea what biomorphic might mean? Anybody have an idea of what biomorphic might mean? I like this. Abstract but still full of life. That sounds good. And Sylvia, it's lagging. You're typing, but Canvas is lagging just a little bit. Yeah, the biomorphic abstraction, bio means life, and morphic means change. And the biomorphic abstraction, what we're dealing with is a three-dimensional abstraction that is informed by organic elements or elements of life. So think of things like some really good examples that can inspire you are coral and ocean life. You have sea slugs, you have seaweed. These kind of three-dimensional elements of seaweed are really interesting. Plant forms, nuts, husks of nuts, some seed pods, teeth, roots, succulents are really fun to look at. And what we're talking about is areas that are organic and interesting in a three-dimensional way that you take out of their context and shift them around and simplify them. Abstract, for the most part, means simplified. Now, what I want to do really quick here is share a slideshow with you, and it is in your regularly scheduled module. Let's see if we can. Okay, that is not doing it. I'm sorry, this is not what I wanted, and I don't know. There we go. Okay. I am trying to share my PowerPoint here. Here we go. Okay. Now, as I'm sharing this, I can't see anybody's faces. And so, Sylvia, or Sadie, you're the only one with a working microphone. So if you wouldn't mind being the voice for the class, I would really appreciate it. This first image, would you say that this is more realistic or more abstract?
I would say it's more realistic.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Absolutely. You can obviously tell it's a tree. You can see the leaves on the tree. You can see the lake behind it that's reflecting the hillside behind it. But it is something that we can expect to see outside. You know, if we look out, if we go hiking, if we go driving in the mountains, you could probably see something like this. So yes, it is realistic. And this is also very realistic. This is a painting from the Hudson River School, which was it's recognized worldwide as the first truly American art movement. And it started around early mid 19th century. But this is very realistic. You see a beautiful atmospheric perspective as the mountains go far into the distance. The trees, you can identify the species of trees because everything is so clear and is so recognizable from something that you would see going out hiking. So, you know, very, very realistic. But this, we're starting to move away from realism. And this gives you an idea of what abstraction starts to show in an image. Sadie, as you look at this, what do you notice about the leaves in that tree?
Are we still looking at the first image of the orange tree?
No, we should be looking at an image of a tree with birds in it.
I don't see that. I just see the first image that we were looking at.
Oh, that is so frustrating. Okay, let's change that. Okay, so this is the one that was Hudson. Can you guys see this? The
Yeah,
Hudson
now
River.
I can see it.
Okay, I'm sorry. It works most of the time. It works just fine. I don't know why it didn't work that time. Okay, now we see in this. What do you notice about the leaves in this tree?
They're all like the same, and some of them are a little bit different color, but they're all very like picturesque leaf shape.
Yeah, they're all the same leaf. We look at these branches; they very smoothly change their width going up. The birds are all in perfect profile. All the flowers are either flat on or at perfect right angles to the viewer. This is very stylized and it's very simplified. It is not realistic. If you saw this in real life, it would probably be really unnerving. And this is where we start seeing what abstraction does. Abstraction simplifies. This is a really good example of biomorphic abstraction. Bio meaning life, and morphic meaning change or shape. And so and we have these leaf shapes. They're obviously leaves, but as we look at them, like Sadie said, they're all identical leaves. They're all the same. Maybe some are blue, maybe, and most of them are green, but other than that, they are all the same leaf shape, which you will not find in nature. There's usually, you know, we can identify leaves of different species, but that's because of the aggregate of form, not because every leaf is shaped the exact same. And we look at this. This is the state flag of New Hampshire. Now, this is still a tree, but is it more realistic or more abstract than that first tree that we looked at that was red and then the Hudson River School trees? What are the things that identify this as being a tree? Well, I think it's flat green, and we associate green with leafiness. The form makes it look like a silhouette of like a fir, you know, a tree like that. We have this trunk type form. But if you saw something like that growing in a forest, would you be freaked out? It does not look natural at all. This is a really good example of how abstract things can start being. Becomes a symbolic representation of a tree. We can still identify it as a tree. If there was only a single light source behind the tree, we'd see it as a silhouette. But we know it's a tree because we've contextualized these kinds of symbols long enough that we automatically associate it. Now, if we look at this one, this is kanji, or Japanese pictograph for tree. What makes this a tree? Can anybody see the tree in this form?
It kind of has the like overall triangular shape of a tree, or at least of like evergreen trees.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. These diagonal forms kind of lend to that. This is um, either the horizon or the root ball, where the tree goes into the ground. It just has moved a place over years. This vertical line represents the main trunk. And then, like you just said, this is the triangular form of the tree canopy, kind of a simplified version of this tree. So yeah, absolutely. And this, but would you say that this is more realistic or more abstract?
Abstract.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very abstract. In fact, it's to the point almost where if you didn't know that this was a symbol representing tree, there's really very little chance you would know that it's a tree. This is painted by a friend of mine, and this is she does these abstract landscapes that are really beautiful. Looking at this, I know that this is a set of trees. These are poplar trees, but the only way I know that is, or I figure that is because of the fields of color. I associate the colors and the overall shape of the tree. This is not naturalistic at all. The color isn't even naturalistic, but the color lends itself to easy interpretation as a simplified version of a poplar tree. And then when we add these, dark vertical rectangles at the bottom of the structures, then we can infer that that is like the base of the trunk. And then it kind of makes a little bit more sense as a tree, but it is very abstracted. And if you turn this on its side, there'd be absolutely no way that you would ever in a million years guess that these are trees. And this next one, this is by Pete Mondrian. And a lot of these paintings that he did, he was famous, the Jugendstil, for doing these, simplifying an image down to primary colors, white and black, where all of the background is white, you have black horizontal and vertical lines, and then you have primary colors instead of shades of color. And looking at this, believe it or not, this is actually a landscape, and that blue area represents like a pool or a pond, and these vertical lines here represent the trunks of trees. But again, how on earth would you know that without any context? And you can see how far the abstraction can go. And I've had people say, well, there's no way that that's going to be a tree. Well, this is a series of 6 paintings that over his lifetime, and you can see the evolution. These paintings are all of the same tree. So this is when he was still working with abstract or impressionism. And you can see that the trunk looks very much like something Van Gogh might have done. And then you see this where he's simplified the tree to just these curving lines, but you can still see the echo of the tree. It looks like to me that he stood on the opposite side of the tree as in this painting. And then here he simplifies it even more, where he has a little bit fewer lines. And then the colors are these really nice neutral colors that don't very often exist on a tree in nature. And then one of the things that Pete Mondrian did was he was active at a time where he could really see the world becoming more and more industrialized, where he could really see cities getting crowded with all these people crammed in living together. And so he started simplifying the shapes into almost like city blocks. And you can kind of see that. This is still the tree, but the branches have become things that almost look like city blocks seen from above. The trunk, we just have an idea that it's a trunk because we know in relationship to these other paintings that it's the same tree, and that's about it. But the colors do not reflect very naturalistically the tree. And then we go to this one in the middle of the bottom where it's even more simplified. And we have these black horizontal and vertical lines, and we have these rather neutral colored rectangles and squares. And the only reason we know it's a tree is because he painted it of the same subject. If you didn't have any context, there's no way you'd know that this was a tree. And then we get to the full abstract where it just feels like there is really no indicator there other than perhaps this could be maybe the trunk. Perhaps these could be branches, these horizontal and vertical lines. But without that context, he has simplified the forms to the point where you can't even recognize the original inspiration. So it makes it, and that's how far abstraction can go. Now for you guys, I want you to think about this kind of area here, where you simplify the forms, but you still have a lot of those organic components to it. I'm going to stop sharing this. But does that help a bit, Camden and Sylvia? Does that help knowing a bit more about what the abstraction means? Okay, good. Now I'm going to go back and share. See, I'm going to go back and share that page again. This is one of the oldest votary sculptures that has ever been found. It is almost as old as the Venus of Willendorf, which I think is about 50,000 years old. And it appears to be a votary of a human-formed feline type figure, because it looks like the head feels to me like more of like a cat or a lion. Very interesting. And what is really interesting to me, though, is the individual doing this put a lot of curved lines in, a lot of organic kind of biological shapes. So it doesn't feel so much like a bowling pin, but it feels like it's a depiction of a figure, imaginative figure that combines elements of different living things. And this is the kind of idea I want you to have in the back of your mind. And go down, watch these videos, as soon as you can. It gives a little bit more of a background onto this structure, which has been referred to as the Lion Man. Now, before we go on, I do want to mention the difference between biomorphic and non-objective abstraction. Non-objective means it doesn't have a root in the observable world. Non-objective expression or abstraction would be like color field painting or spatter painting, or when people are abstracting letters, like in calligraphy, because they are things that don't have a root in the real world, or when somebody's painting what it feels like to be sad. With biomorphic abstraction, what we're doing is trying to find elements that we think are intriguing in things like shapes of bones or teeth or pine cones or leaves, and then use that to inform the carving that we do. And there are a couple of videos here, and I do include right here, this is the PowerPoint that I just walked through with you. And so those are good reference points. And I'm going to stop sharing for just a little bit and find the next element I wanted to take you to. Let's see. All righty. There we go. In your kit, you have a block of styrofoam, and that's what you're going to be carving into. And some of these videos I have where people are carving different materials. And several of these, I want you to go through each of the links, see what you can get, see what and how it informs what you're doing. I would try to be really careful. Wear gloves if you can. Wear clothes that you don't care about. One thing that I like to do is go to Deseret Industries or Goodwill, get the biggest shirt I can possibly find that's long sleeve and put it on backwards, and then put a couple, do up a couple of the buttons on the back, because that really protects a lot of my clothing. I would also recommend putting down like maybe cutting open some large lawn garbage bags to put underneath you, something like that, so you can clean it up relatively easily. And you have in your kit files as well as some knife blades, and I would use those to help starting your carving. And if you find other things that you can use, go ahead and use those too. Now you'll notice that in one of these, I think this person does balsa wood carving. Principles are very similar. And I would go ahead and watch that and see if you can gain anything out of that to help with the carving the styrofoam. But as you look at different organic forms around you, do some research. Look at things like succulents, desert plants. Look at things like teeth, bones. I particularly like hip bones, socket bones. If you guys eat chicken or anything like that, chicken bones are really good to look at. And what I want you to do is look at specific forms, because we're not making something that exists already in the real world. We're combining different forms. Like if we look at these sculptures here, I hope you can see in this one on the right, we can see some of these forms look like they've been suggested by maybe a hip cradle of something, or a scapula. Some of these to make me think of how sometimes stone gets weathered by the wind, which can look really organic, but it also makes me think of things like plant life. Maybe if you can imagine leaves that you pump full of air so that they become leaf pillows, and combining different forms of that together. This I think is kind of fun because this person there's succulent leaves in this. The person also used some suggestions from teeth, and made this really interesting form. One of the things that you see that's consistent though on all of these is that the person sanded and rounded it so that they feel like they flow. And that is a really important element. Some of the artists that you see in the background section for this are going to have chunkier pieces. Some of them are going to be a lot more organic. What we are looking for is something that flows smoothly, that's organic. This to me almost looks like maybe the crown of a molar that's been separated out from the rest of the tooth. Some of these areas remind me a little bit of shoulder blades. So there's lots of really interesting stuff. And what I want you to, I did include a video of me carving, and you can see that. Let's see. Oh no, okay. It might be if you go forward to the paper mache area, but I will find that video and link it here at the bottom as well, so you can see how I carved something and go through the whole project with it. So I will remember to do that as soon as we're done with the meeting. And I just take you through it. And it might be kind of fun if you have any chunks of clay to fiddle with the clay a little bit and see what the clay does. Then after you do your carving, you'll take photos of it, turn it in like that. Before this discussion, what I want you to do is comment on the sculptures of 3 other students after you post images of your own thing. So it's important to post those as early as you can in the process. But they, with this one, I don't think they're due for another couple weeks. Let's see. June 26th. Yeah, so they are due for a couple weeks, but that gives you plenty of time to work out different shapes and different ideas. If you don't have access to clay, you go to the Dollar Tree, get Play-Doh, and fiddle with the forms there. When you do this, it would be, if you'd like, take some photos of it, and see how close you can get to it as a reference. But I want you to do that just to play with the idea a little bit. You can go straight into carving, and that's totally fine, but it might be more worthwhile to play with this a little bit with the Play-Doh clay. Or if you don't have Play-Doh, you can take several paper towel sheets, get them really wet, wring the water out mostly, and then use that as kind of a clay to work with. If you do that, make sure you throw it away in a garbage can. Do not try to rinse it down the sink, because it will plug the sink and make all your roommates hate your guts. So don't do that. But I would say work with something like that to get some of the forms in your head, and then start carving the styrofoam. So do you guys have any questions about this? We're going to go over the wire stuff and structure with skin again next week, and we'll talk more about this as well next week, and we'll look at the next steps as well. But like I said, as soon as we get off of this call, I will be adding that video that so you can see me doing a little bit of carving and then applying paper mache to the sculpture. For some people, this makes them really uncomfortable because they think that they have to do something that's realistic. This is an abstract. That means that just like that Henry Moore sculpture that we saw when we looked at the quiz, you can kind of recognize some shapes in there, but that is very much a biomorphic abstraction because it is not designed to be a realistic, recognizable form. It's designed to combine different elements of different organic structures. Does this help people? Does this kind of make sense? Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the material that we covered today? I know this was a little bit shorter than what we're used to, and I am sorry about that. I know how much you enjoy my long-winded lectures, and I feel sad that I disappointed you tonight. But that's all that I needed to cover at this time. And if anybody has any questions, let's see. Camden, the tool to use to carve this out. In your kit, you have craft knives, or you have a craft knife that you can use, but you also have files. And the files will cut through the styrofoam really easily, but you have to be careful with them because it will make a mess. And yes, the materials for this are in your kit. Now, if you have other things that you want to use, that'd be just fine too. I have had people use metal clothing hangers that they have heated up with blow dryers, hair dryers. That can work as well. I'd be really careful with that. I'd probably want to use the knives and everything first. And whenever you use the knife, be super, super careful. Never, ever carve towards yourself. And whenever possible, wear gloves. Wear gloves as much as you can. And I would have a tendency to want to use the files more than knives just because I do not like the sight of my own blood. So be really, really careful. Now you guys do have the files in your kits, right? You do have at least a file? Okay, good. Sylvia says yes. Okay, all right, good. And we will talk about this more next week as well. In the meantime, I would say work on turning in your wire thing, work on your discussion thing, and work on your structure with skin thing. And between now and then, also just get yourself a little bit of clay. Like you can get those little tiny Play-Doh cans at the Dollar Tree. Grab one of those, play with it, and see what kind of forms you can come up with before you start carving. So hopefully that'll be fun. Now, has any of you guys thought about what other words we can use rather than diversity collaborator for that assignment that we did a couple weeks ago. One thing I was thinking was just select a success collaborator, as I thought that might be worthwhile. But I like the idea of collaboration, cultural appropriation training, because we do address that. That's good. Maybe maybe cultural inclusivity. Okay, inclusion collaborator. Okay, something to think about. If you guys have any really good ideas that sound terrific, let's talk about it next week too. But please help me and think about it over the next several days and see what other ideas you can come up with. Because the idea is we want cultural inclusivity. Oh, I like that. Like a cultural expression collaborator. I think one of the things that is interesting to me is that ideas like racism and prejudice are learned behaviors. Uh, Generally, learned behaviors are things like violence, competition. Those are learned behaviors. Prejudice, that's a learned behavior. What's interesting to me is when on the news, when you see people rioting or attacking each other, that is just a moment out of thousands of different similar things that happen around the world where people actually get along. And people get along and connect with each other a lot more than they fight each other. And it's interesting. I have been in areas where there have been tornadoes, natural disasters, and things like that. And even though the news shows riots and people tearing things apart, 99% of the people that I see after that kind of devastation, our instinctual response is to help people around us. And that's true all the time. I mean, little kids, doesn't matter what they look like, what they sound like. You put little kids in a room, almost all of them are going to make friends, start smiling at each other, and play with each other, whether or not they speak each other's language. And it's the human tendency to get along with the people around us. And what is really sad is elements of culture raise their heads to try to support separation. And I think that's really sad. So I think even though that portion of our class is really minor, it's a good thing to remember because as artists, as creative engineers, creativity engineers, we are in a unique position where we don't have to preach to somebody to help them change their mind. We can just show them the beauty that they already recognize, but maybe feel afraid to respond to in a positive way. And so I think it is important to be success collaborators with those around us who have different things to say and are not the same as we are, whatever that sameness is. It's also interesting to note that every culture on the planet has in its most bedrock foundational ideas the prospect that the guest or treatment of the stranger is a sacred responsibility. You can go to areas that we think are culturally primitive all around the planet, and whether or not the people there might hate the country that you're from, they will be incredibly kind to you as an individual because that idea of hosting the guest is a sacred thing. And I think that that's absolutely fascinating. But anyway, something to think about. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Do you guys have any last thoughts or observations or questions? All righty then. If you guys do think of anything else, email me and we will talk about it next week as well. Let's see. Okay, we're Sadie and Camden. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. All right, that is all I have. And I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week and weekend. And I will look forward to seeing you Thursday.